Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Gyan-Sagar. Today we are going to learn about cognitive psychology. This is one of the subject of MA Psychology. I will be uploading a series of video covering all units of cognitive psychology. Today we will begin to learn the first unit. In the first unit we will cover introduction, research method in cognitive psychology, domain of cognitive psychology, a brief history of cognitive psychology, first we will learn introduction. Introduction. Cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology is the study of mental processes such as perceiving, remembering, and reasoning. This is three items: perceiving, remembering, and reasoning. In cognitive psychology, main things is perceiving, remembering, and reasoning. How people perceive, remember, and reasoning about the information. Why do psychologists study mental process? Since the beginning of recorded history, people have expressed curiosity about the operation of mind, largely because they believe that behavior is the result of mental process. Behavior is the mental process. For example, how are we to understand the very behavior in which we are engaged at this moment reading this course of book? At one level, we are interested in explaining your ability to comprehend what you are reading, and in so doing, we are likely to appeal to process of perception of word, computation of meaning. That all things are introduction. Cognitive psychology is the study of how people perceive, learn, remember, and think about information. A cognitive psychology might study how people perceive various shapes, why they are remember some facts but forget others, or how they learn language. Consider some example of everyday experiences that are also of theoretical interest of cognitive psychology. First thing, that research method in cognitive psychology. In research method, cognitive psychology has goal of research to better understand the specific method used by cognitive psychology. One must grasp the goal of research in cognitive psychology. Briefly, those goals include data gathering, data analysis, theory development, hypothesis formulation, hypothesis testing, and perhaps even application to setting outside research environment. Distinctive research method. Cognitive psychology use various methods to explore how women think. These methods are include laboratory method or other control experiment method, psychobiological research, self-report, case study, naturalistic observation, and computer simulation, artificial intelligence. We learn each by each method. Experiment on human behavior. In control experiment design, an experimenter conduct research typically in a laboratory setting. एक्सपेरिमेंट मेथड आमतौर पर लेबोरेटरी सेटिंग में लेबोरेटरी में किया जाता है. द एक्सपेरिमेंटर कंट्रोल एज मैनी एस्पेक्ट ऑफ एक्सपेरिमेंटल सिचुएशन एज पॉसिबल. देयर आर बेसिकली टू काइंड्स ऑफ वेरिएबल्स, dependent variables and independent variables. In research method, two variables are important: dependent variables and independent variable. Dependent variable, that variable we cannot manipulate, but independent variable can be manipulated in an experiment. Psychobiological research. Though psychobiological research investigator study the relationship between cognitive performance and cerebral event and situation, the various specific technique used in the psychobiological research generally fall into three category. The first category is that the technique for study and individual's brain postmortem, relating the individual is cognitive function prior to death to observable feature of brain. The second category is the technique for study image, showing a structured activity in the brain of an individual who is known to have a particular cognitive deficit. ब्रेन पोस्टमार्टम फर्स्ट थिंग, दूसरा कॉग्निटिव डेफिसिट, द थर्ड इज technique for obtaining information about cerebral process during the normal performance of a cognitive activities using brain imaging technique. Number 3, self-report, case study, and naturalistic observation. Individual experiment and psychobiological study often focus on precise specification of discrete aspect of cognitive across individuals to obtain richly textured information about how particular individuals think in a broad range of context. Researchers may use self-report, case study, and naturalistic observation. On the one hand, experimental research is most useful for testing hypotheses. On the other hand, research based on qualitative method is often particularly useful for formulation of hypotheses. The methods are also useful to generate descriptions of rare event or process that we have no other way to measure. Now, number 4, computer simulation and artificial intelligence. Digital computer play a fundamental role in emergence of a study of cognitive psychology. One kind of influence is indirect, though models of human cognition based on models of how computers process information. another kind of direct, that is through computer simulation and artificial intelligence. In computer simulation, researchers program computer to imitate a given human function or process. Some researchers even have attempted to create computer models of entire cognitive architecture of human mind. Domain of cognitive psychology. Now we learn domain of cognitive psychology. Modern cognitive psychology freely draw theory technique from 12 principal area of domain. There are 12 area of research. There are 12 domain of cognitive psychology. Cognitive neuroscience, perception, thinking and concepts formulation, attention, representation of knowledge, consciousness, memory, imagery, language, developmental psychology, pattern recognition, human artificial intelligence. There are 12 areas. We will discuss one by one in 12 areas. First area is cognitive neuroscience. Only within the past few years have cognitive psychologists and cognitive neuroscientists formed a close working relationship. Thus far, the union has produced some of the most provocative development in the study of our mental character. Cognitive psychologists are seeking neurological explanation for their findings, and neuroscientists are turning to cognitive psychology to explain observations made in their laboratories. Every part of cognitive process, from sensations to memory, is supported by basic electrochemical process taking place in the brain and nervous system. Number two, perception. The branch of psychology directly involves the detection and interpretation of sensory stimuli is perception. What is perception? The branch of psychology directly involved with the detection and interpretation of sensory stimuli is perception. From experiment in perception, we have a good understanding of sensitivity of human organism to sensory signal, and more important to cognitive psychology of the way we interpret sensory signal. The experimental study of perception has helped identify many of the parts of this process. However, the study of perception alone does not adequately account for the expected performance. Other cognitive systems are involved, including pattern recognition, attention, consciousness, and memory. Number 3, pattern recognition. Environmental stimuli rarely are perceived as a single sensory event. They usually are perceived as a part of more meaningful pattern. The things we sense, see, hear, feel, taste, or smell are almost always part of complex pattern of sensory stimuli. Attention. Number 4, attention. Although we are information gathering creature, We are information gathering creature. Human are information gathering creatures. It is evidence that under normal circumstances, we are also highly selective in amount and type of information to which we attain. Our capacity to process information seems to be limited to two levels, sensory and cognitive. If become overloaded, if we try to process too many events in memory, we can become overloaded, which may cause a breakdown in performance. All of you have felt that some way at one time or another. Number 5 area of cognitive psychology is consciousness. Consciousness is defined as the current awareness of the external or internal circumstances, rejected as being unscientific by the behaviorist. The word consciousness and concept it represents similarly did not fade away. For example, consciousness and unconsciousness thoughts are very real. For example, when you glance at your watch while studying at it reads 10, 12 p.m., 10 p.m., you are consciousness or aware of that external signal. However, your reading of the time also bring up another consciousness thought, one that was initially activated by reading the time but is formed inside. That consciousness thought might be, it is getting late. I would better finish this chapter and go to bed. Consciousness has gained new respectability recent and how is the concept studied seriously in modern cognitive psychology. Number 6. Memory and perception work together. The information available to us comes from our perception, short-term memory and long-term memory. Representation of knowledge. Fundamental of all human cognition is representation of knowledge. How information is symbolized and combined with the thing stored in the brain. The part of cognition has two aspects. The conceptual representation of knowledge in the mind and the way in the brain store and process information. Imagery. Number 8. Imagery. Cognitive psychology are especially interested in topic of internal representation of knowledge. The mental image of environment are formed in the form of a cognitive map, a type of mental representation of the juxtaposed building, a street sign, a spotlight, and so on. Language. One form of language shared by all human scientists, society. Language is the important area of cognitive psychology. Language, one form of knowledge shared by all human societies, is the knowledge of language. Language is the principal means by which we acquire and express knowledge. Thus, the study of how language is used is a central concept of cognitive psychology. Developmental psychology. 10. Developmental psychology is another important area of cognitive psychology that has been intensely studied. Recent study and theory in developmental cognitive psychology have greatly expanded our understanding of how cognitive structure develop as adults. We have all lived through childhood and adolescence, and we share maturational experiences with all members of our species. Number 11. Thinking and concept formulation. Thinking and concept formulation is an important area of cognitive psychology. Thinking is the crown jewels of cognition. Thinking is the crown jewels of cognition. Thinking is the process by which a new mental representation is formed through the transformation of information. Advances in cognitive psychology have led to formidable arsenal of research technique and theoretical models. An ability to think and form concept is an important aspect of cognition. Our last area of cognitive psychology, human artificial intelligence. Human artificial intelligence is one of the most important area of cognitive psychology. Human intelligence includes the ability to acquire, recall, and use knowledge to understand concrete and abstract concepts and the relationship among objects and areas. To understand a language, to follow instruction, to convert verbal description into actions, and to behave according to rules, and to use knowledge in a meaningful way. We have learned the domain of cognitive psychology. Then now learn a brief history of cognitive psychology. A brief history. As we have learned, a great portion of cognitive psychology deals with how knowledge is presented in mind. In this section on the history of cognitive psychology, we will review three major periods. First, early thought on thinking, cognition in Renaissance and beyond. And third period, cognitive psychology in early 20th century. Early thought on thinking. Where we did knowledge come from? Knowledge कहाँ से आता है? And how is it represented in the mind? That internal question is fundamental to cognitive psychology as it has been through the age of humankind. Basically, two answers have been proposed. The first, empirical humankind, that knowledge comes from experiment, and other, nativist, suggest that knowledge is based on innate character. Knowledge is based on innate character, and first, empirical human maintain that knowledge comes from experience. Knowledge comes from experience, and knowledge is innate character. From a scientific perspective, neither case can be definitively proved. So the argument continue without clear resolution. Without clear resolution, two thoughts are argue with each other. With these issues clearly before us, let us consider the way ancient philosophers and early psychologists grappled with the issue. The fascination with knowledge can be traced to earliest writing. Early theory were concerned with seat of thought and memory. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics suggest their authors believed that knowledge was localized in the heart. Hieroglyphics suggest their authors believed that knowledge was localized in the heart. उनका मानना था कि नॉलेज जो ज्ञान है जो हार्ट में स्थित रहती है. ए व्यू शेयर्ड बाय द अर्ली ग्रीक फिलोसोफर एरिस्टोटल. ये एरिस्टोटल के द्वारा माना गया है कि जो ज्ञान है सो हार्ट में स्थित रहता है, बट नोट बाय प्लेटो. यह प्लेटो का मानना नहीं है था. हु हेल्ड दैट ब्रेन वाज locus of knowledge. Cognition in the Renaissance and beyond. Renaissance philosophers and theologians seems generally satisfied that knowledge was located in the brain. इनका मानना था ब्रेन नॉलेज है सो ब्रेन में स्थित है. दे कंसिडर दैट नॉलेज वाज एक्वायर्ड नॉट ओनली थ्रू द फिजिकल सेंस बट एल्सो फ्रॉम डिवाइन सोर्स. ड्यूरिंग द 18th century when philosophic psychology was brought to the point where scientific psychology could assume a role, the British empiricist George Berkeley, David Hume, and later James Mill and his son John Stuart Mill suggested the internal representation is of three types: direct sensory, event, faint copy of percepts, and third, transformation of these faint copy as an associated thought. These notions are the basics of much current research in cognitive psychology. During 18th century, early psychologists like Gustav Fechner, Franz Brentano, Hermann Helmholtz, G. Muller, Oswald Culpe, Hermann Ebbinghaus, Sir Francis Galton, Edward Titchener, and William James and others shared to break away from philosophy to form a discipline based on empirical result rather than on speculation. ब्रेक अवे अलग फिलॉसफी से अलग नया सब्जेक्ट बनाया. बाय द फर्स्ट हाफ द 19th century, theory of representation of knowledge were clearly dichotomous that emphasizes the structure of mental representation. and the process or act. Cognitive psychology in early 20th century, the representation of knowledge took a radical turn with the advent of 20th century behaviorism and Gestalt psychology. The behaviorist view of human and animal psychology were cast in a framework of stimulus-response psychology (SR), and Gestalt theorists built elaborate and conceptualizations of internal representation within the context of isomorphism, one-to-one relationship between representation and reality. Psychological study of mental process and conceptualized in the late 19th century suddenly became unfashionable display by behavioralism. A study of internal mental operation and structures such as attention, consciousness, memory, thinking were laid to rest remain so for about 50 years. In 1932, some years before the cognitive revolution swept across psychology, learning psychologist Edward Tolman from the University of California at Berkeley published Purposive Behavior in Animal and Man. In this seminal work, Tolman observed that what rats learn in a maze is the layout of the land, rather than simply a series of SR connections. Also in 1932, Sir Frederick Bartlett from Cambridge University wrote Remembering, in which he rejected the then popular view that memory and forgetting can be studied by means of nonsense syllabi. As had been advocated by Ebbingus in Germany during the previous century. In the study of human memory, Bartlett argued that use of rich and meaningful material under naturalistic conditions would yield far more significant conclusions. Cognitive psychology, as it is today, in 1915th century interested again began to locus on attention, memory, pattern recognition, image, semantic organization, language process, thinking, and even consciousness, as well as other cognitive topics one considered outside the boundary of experimental psychology. New journal professional groups were founded as psychologists began more and more to turn to cognitive psychology. As cognitive psychology became established with even greater clarity, it was plain that this was a branch of psychology different from that in vogue during the 1930th century and 1940th century. Among the most important forces accounting for this new cognitive revolution were the following. The emergence of communication theory, modern linguistics, memory research, computer science, and other technical advantage. Cognitive development, that is cognitive psychology as it is today. Key issue in the study of cognitive psychology. There are many key issues in the study of cognitive psychology. Nature versus nurture. It is main issue, nurture versus nature. Which is more influential in human cognition, nature or nurture? If we believe that innate characteristics of human cognition are more important, we might focus our research on study innate character of cognition. If we believe that the environment play an important role in cognition, we might conduct research exploring how distinctive research character of environment seem to influence cognition. Number 2, key issue in the study of cognitive psychology: rationalism versus empirism. How should we discover the truth about ourselves and about the world around us? Should we do so by trying to reason logically based on what already know? One should we do so by observing and testing our observation of what we can perceive through our sense? And how can we combine theory and empirical method to learn and most we can about cognitive phenomena? Structure versus process are the key issue in the cognitive psychology, in the study of cognitive psychology. Structure versus process. Should we study the structure, content, attribute, and product of the human mind? Or should we focus on process of human thinking? Domain generality versus domain specify. Are process we observe limited to single domain? Are they generally across a variety of domains? Do observe in the domain apply also to all domain, or do they apply only to a specific domain observed? Validity of causal inference versus ecological validity. Should we study cognition by using highly controlled experiment that increase the probability of valid inference regarding causality, or should we use more naturalistic techniques? And another issue are applied versus and basic research. Should we conduct research into fundamental cognitive process, or should we study way in which to help people use cognitive effectively in practical situation? One another issue in the study of cognitive psychology, biological versus behavioral method. Should we study the brain and its function directly, perhaps even scanning the brain while people are performing cognitive tasks? Or should we study people's behavioral in cognitive tasks, looking at measures such as percentage correct and reaction time? Key idea in cognitive psychology. Key idea in cognitive psychology. Data in cognitive psychology can be fully understood only in context of an explanatory theory, but theory are empty without empirical data. Cognition is generally adaptive but not in all specific instances. Cognitive processes interact with each other and with non-cognitive process. Cognition needs to study through a variety of scientific methods. Computer metaphor and human cognition. Computer metaphor and human cognition. Although Pascal, Descartes, and others dreamed of computed machine century ago, it was not until the development of high-speed digital computers more than 50 years ago the practical machine were invented, these machines gained enormous accepted and rare are presently used in virtually every aspect of modern life. Originally, such devices were thought to be wonderful member crunchers capable of performing a multitude of complex mathematical operations in a fraction of the time required by humans. However, the computers do well. Humans do properly, relatively speaking, and what humans do well, computers do properly or not at all. Despite this problem, a second generation of cognitive computer science is working toward building computers that looked something like a brain. Cognitive science. Three powerful areas of cognitive development, namely computer science, neuroscience, and cognitive psychology, coverage to create a new science called cognitive science. Cognitive science include computer science, neuroscience, and cognitive psychology. Neuroscience and cognitive psychology. During the early stage of cognitive psychology, little attention was given to psychology, physiological psychology, or neuroanatomy. Much of the rarely information on the brain and its functions resulted from head traumas occurred during wars and accidents. The central issue neurologists struggled with was whether the brain was a holistic organ with operation distributed throughout its infrastructures, or whether activities were localized and tied to a specific region. For example, did learning a specific act take place in a localized area of the brain, or was learning distributed throughout many parts of the brain? Among the most prominent of the scientists who wrestled with these issues was Carl Lassley. Recently, progress has been made in field of neuroscience, which comprise both the structural aspect of the brain and its peripheral component, as well as the functional aspect. Neurocognitive techniques, which have been developing very rapidly in the past several decades, allow us to see deeper, more clearly into brain. And the brain is believed to be the engine of cognition. The brain is believed to be the engine of cognition. Virtually every area of cognition has been investigated with neurocognitive technique. These techniques, MRI, PET, EEG, and the like, show not only the structure of cognition but also the process involved. And in many instances, the results have been remarkable. While this trend is likely to continue, and grow. It is important to recognize the central theme in cognition mentioned above. That is only thing that is we are reading. That is all. We can see you tomorrow.